Maybe you are like me. You find yourself this morning a little bit bewildered that we're already here celebrating Harvest Thanksgiving. Somehow, time just moves a little faster every year. And maybe if you're like me, that's actually cause to question what it is exactly that we do at Harvest Thanksgiving every year anyways. What story do we tell? What story do we find ourselves in? One of those rituals that seems to happen every year, certainly in my family, maybe in yours, is we gather around a table sometime between this week and next week, and we kind of go around and think about things that we're thankful for. Maybe you've been in family gatherings where that's gotten a little weird, where it's an opportunity to get a jab in, perhaps, at another family member. I'm thankful that Aunt Fluffy's finally got that thing sorted out that we were all worried about, whatever it might be. Or sometimes it's an occasion to bask in how good we have it, to make ourselves feel better, to maybe feel like we, in some way, earn or deserve the things that we've been given. And sometimes it's really just bare, superficial fluff, where we as good Canadians have learned that it is nice to be nice, and that nice people take time every now and again to remember that they have good things, and to be generally thankful. But the question remains, thankful to whom? Thankful for what? Thankful how? What does any of this really mean anyways? Other than an excuse to get together and eat turkey, which of course we all love. There's a danger, I think, sometimes, in imagining that we have to give thanks because it actually justifies the things that we have, or maybe is kind of like good luck in that it primes us to receive more of the same good things that we've wanted. That's not a new thing. That's not a new story that we tell ourselves. In the ancient world, in the time when the book of Deuteronomy was written, everyone knew that in a harvest society where you were very much at the whims of the rain and the sun, when you knew that you couldn't control how much you would harvest, you had to make sure the gods were on your side. So you would gather up whatever you were able to harvest that year, and you would set aside some, and you would sacrifice it to whatever tribal god your people believed in. And you never quite knew how much to give. If you had a good harvest, you would offer a little more than last year in thanksgiving, because to do otherwise would be ungrateful. But if you didn't have as good a harvest, well, then you probably didn't offer enough the last year, so you have to give more. And so you end up in this endless cycle, fueled by fear and uncertainty, trying to win over the favor of distant and angry gods, never really sure what it is that you can count on. And that isn't so far removed from the way that we live sometimes. Sometimes it feels like we're actually in a season of Thanksgiving because we experience it here in Canada in our own particular way, and we watch from afar as that season continues in the United States with its own particular flavor. And when you layer on the kind of colonial issues and the patriotism and the idea that we just get good things because we're part of a strong Western society, you start to wonder if we're much different than the folks in that ancient world seeking to appease distant and angry gods. But the story that we're told in Deuteronomy is very different. Moses is essentially giving his last directions to the whole assembled people of Israel before they move into the Promised Land. And Moses is providing instructions for what Thanksgiving will look like. And the amazing thing about these instructions is that it's more about how we live in relationship to God and to one another than it is any kind of Thanksgiving that we might see as familiar. There's a story that's being told. A story that begins with a distant ancestor who was a wandering Aramean, who, equipped with nothing other than a seed of faith, follows God into this incredible unfolding story of salvation, which is recounted as the first fruits are brought forward. And it's almost like the point here isn't so much these first fruits. It's not the milk and the honey that they've been blessed with that they're really focusing on. It's actually that story of salvation. It's actually remembering that God ordains a place in their midst where his name will dwell. That God isn't distant and angry, but very much present, and that we don't need to be afraid, that we know where we stand with God. The harvest in this context is really just the occasion, it's just the reminder, like an example, almost like a sacrament, as a kind of outward and visible sign of the inward and spiritual truth that God is with us and we need not be afraid. And so in good times and in bad, in seasons of harvest and plenty and seasons of scarcity, there's this underlying current in these instructions that are given in Deuteronomy, that we get together and we tell our story. And that story about God's faithfulness becomes a kind of prayer. And that prayer, embodied in this basket that is being offered, has a kind of sacramental flavor to it. Not so much about what it is that we receive, but instead remembering that the one from whom we receive it is present and with us. And the other striking thing about these instructions in Deuteronomy is that even as they remember that Israel was a nation of aliens in a strange land, so will they get together at the harvest and have a party and make sure that those who cannot provide for themselves are invited to the table. Make sure that the alien and the wanderer and the priests and all those who don't have their own means of production, they all get invited in as well. Because that's what you do when you see that the blessing you have received is actually intended to enable you to bless others. And the thing is that Jesus, in the Gospel of John that we read this morning, echoes exactly the same thing. He encounters these people who have been looking for him because they've kind of gone and wandered off in a boat, and these people who are trying to follow him finally catch up. And he says to them, are you here because you've seen the signs, or are you here because you've eaten your fill of the loaves? Is the point the stuff that we've been given, or is the point the relationship that we have with the God from whom all good things come? For which do we give thanks? And Jesus says that unlike the story that we might tell ourselves from time to time, unlike the whole worldview that defined the ancient world, Jesus says that the God who provides all those good things is present, and even present in his very person. That it wasn't even Moses, the greatest person in Israel's history, not even Moses could cause bread to fall from heaven. It was God, and it's the same God who draws near in the person of Christ. So the question then is, what does Thanksgiving look like? To whom are we thankful, and for what are we thankful? If we're only thankful in times of plenty, then what do we do when things run scarce? The really wonderful thing, the true good news that we're called to remember, is exactly what Jesus says. That our story is bigger than our own individual circumstances, and the harvest for which we are thankful is bigger than the things that we can heap into baskets on any given Sunday. Our story is the thing that we recount around that table Sunday by Sunday, where we remember that God is present and with us. And our story becomes a prayer. And as we pray that prayer together, we experience the sacramental presence of God in the Eucharist and in our lives and in our communities. And we come to know, deep down in our bones, that we're not alone, that God isn't distant and God isn't angry, and that in his world, in his economy, in his kingdom, all things will work out. And so the blessings that we're given then, we're freed up to share with others, with the strangers, the foreigners, those who we like to say are less fortunate than we are. And so, my sisters and brothers, as we find ourselves once again celebrating Harvest Thanksgiving in all the different permutations that takes in our church and in our culture, may we ask ourselves what story we're a part of. May we know that we give thanks not so much for the things that we are given, but for the God who is present and with us now and always, drawing us deeper into the present reality of the kingdom. And that, my friends, is something to be thankful for. Amen.